My best friend made me dress in plain clothes for the ball selection. She went mental when the hottest man chose me to be his date. Every year, the Marine Academy students would come to our university to pick dates for their formal ball. It was this huge tradition where they'd walk through our main courtyard in their dress uniforms and formally ask someone to be their date. My best friend Alexis had been obsessing about this since freshman year. She'd spent 3 years planning what she'd wear when they came, how she'd position herself in the courtyard, and even practiced her surprised face in the mirror. She was convinced multiple Marines would choose her and would graciously pick the best-looking one. When senior year finally came, she made me wake up at 5 in the morning to do her hair and makeup. She wore this red dress that she'd bought specifically for this day and spent $200 on it. She made me wear my regular jeans and a plain shirt because she said she didn't want us to compete for attention. And besides, the Marines never picked girls like me anyway. She actually said I was the supportive friend type, not the chosen type, and I should be happy with that role. We stood in the courtyard with about 200 other girls, and Alexis positioned us right in the center where everyone could see her. When the Marines walked in, everyone went quiet. There were about 30 of them, all in their formal uniforms, and leading them was this guy who looked like he walked out of a movie. 6'3", perfect posture, and these green eyes that you could see from across the courtyard. Alexis grabbed my arm so tight she left bruises and whispered that he was hers. She began posing and flipping her hair, ensuring he'd notice her. He walked straight toward us, and Alexis stepped forward with her practiced, surprised face ready, but he walked right past her and stopped in front of me. He said his name was Colin and asked if I'd do him the honor of being his date to the Marine Ball. Alexis literally gasped out loud and tried to step between us, saying there must be some mistake. Colin politely moved around her and kept looking at me, waiting for my answer. When I said yes, he smiled and handed me a formal invitation with his contact information. Alexis stood there frozen while other Marines chose their dates all around us. Not a single one approached her. For the rest of the day, Alexis didn't speak to me. When we got back to our apartment, she finally exploded. She said I must have done something to trick him, maybe talked to him before somehow. She accused me of secretly preparing for this and pretending not to care so she wouldn't suspect. She said I knew how much this meant to her, and I deliberately stole her moment. She actually used the word stole like Colin was property she'd claimed. She demanded I text Colin and tell him I couldn't go, that I was sick or had a boyfriend or anything to get out of it. When I refused, she said I was the worst friend in the world, and that plain girls like me didn't deserve guys like Colin. She said he probably felt sorry for me or lost a bet and had to pick the ugliest girl he could find. She spent the next 2 days giving me the silent treatment while texting everyone we knew that I'd betrayed her. She told people I'd been planning this for months and deliberately sabotaged her chances. Then she did something unforgivable. She texted Colin from my phone while I was in the shower. She told him I'd changed my mind and didn't want to go with him, that I'd only said yes to be polite, but I wasn't interested in military guys. She deleted the conversation so I wouldn't see it. When Colin didn't text me for 3 days, I thought he'd changed his mind until his roommate reached out asking why I'd been so cruel in my rejection. That's when I found out what Alexis had done. I contacted Colin immediately and explained everything. He was relieved because he'd actually been really excited about taking me. He said he'd noticed me volunteering at the campus veteran center and thought I was beautiful and kind. He'd specifically come to our university hoping to ask me. We made plans for the ball, and I didn't tell Alexis I'd fixed things. Instead, I told her she was right, and Colin hadn't contacted me again, so I probably wouldn't go. She immediately perked up and started being my friend again, saying she knew he didn't really want me. The night of the Marine Ball, Alexis was in our apartment watching movies and eating ice cream, fully believing I was also home moping in my room. I was actually at the ball in a gorgeous navy dress my sister had lent me, dancing with Colin, who turned out to be funny and smart and genuinely interested in me. I got back to the apartment around 10 in the morning, still feeling like I was floating from the night before. The ball had been perfect. Colin had been perfect. Dancing with him, talking with him, laughing at his stupid jokes about marine life. My feet hurt from the heels my sister lent me with the dress, and I had glitter from the decorations stuck in my hair, but I didn't care. I opened the door as quietly as I could and saw Alexis exactly where I'd left her last night. She was on the couch in her pajamas with a blanket, watching some romantic comedy and eating directly from a pint of ice cream. The apartment smelled like the popcorn she'd made, and there were tissues scattered on the coffee table like she'd been having a sad movie marathon. My stomach twisted with guilt, even though I knew what she'd done to me was worse. She looked up when I came in. "How was your moping evening?" She asked it with this fake sympathetic voice that made my skin crawl. I clutched my small purse behind my back where she couldn't see it. The purse had my phone and the formal invitation Colin gave me at the ball with his number written on the back in neat handwriting. "It was fine," I said, heading straight for my room. Just watch some stuff on my laptop. I knew you'd get over him eventually. She turned back to her movie. Guys like that don't actually go for girls like us anyway. They just do the whole formal asking thing because it's tradition. I closed my door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The navy dress was still in my car where I'd hidden it that morning. I'd changed back into regular clothes in the parking lot before coming up. I sat on my bed and pulled out my phone. Colin had already texted me twice asking if I got home safe and saying he had an amazing time. I smiled and texted him back, then shoved the phone under my pillow when I heard Alexis moving around in the living room. The next few days were weird. I texted with Colin constantly but had to hide it like I was doing something illegal. He wanted to see me again, wanted to take me to dinner or just hang out on campus, but I kept making excuses. Every time I thought about running into someone who might mention the ball to Alexis, my stomach hurt. We finally agreed to meet for coffee at this place 2 miles off campus that no students ever went to. It was mostly older people and business workers on their lunch breaks. I got there first and sat in the back corner booth where nobody could see me from the windows. Colin showed up 10 minutes later in jeans and a regular shirt instead of his uniform. He looked different, but still good. He slid into the booth across from me and smiled, then reached across the table to hold my hand. I pulled it back and looked around to make sure nobody from the school was there. "Sorry," I said. "I'm just being careful." He ordered coffee and we talked for a while about nothing important. He told me about his classes at the academy and I told him about my biology exam coming up. Then he got quiet and looked at me seriously. "Can I ask you something?" He stirred sugar into his coffee. "Why are we meeting 2 miles off campus like we're having an affair? You know I want to take you out for real. Like actual dates where we don't have to hide." I explained everything. The whole story about Alexis sabotaging me by texting from my phone, how I'd fixed it without telling her, how I'd let her think he ghosted me so she wouldn't freak out. I told him about lying to her about not going to the ball and how she still thought I'd spent that night alone in my room. Colin listened without interrupting, his coffee getting cold in front of him. "That's really messed up," he said when I finished. "What she did with your phone. That's not what friends do." "I know." I picked at my napkin. "But if I tell her now that I went to the ball and we're seeing each other, she'll lose it. She'll make my life terrible. We live together and share all the same friends." Colin was quiet for a minute. "So you're going to keep lying to her? For how long?" "I don't know. Until I figure out what to do." He reached across the table again and this time I let him take my hand. "I get it. Toxic friendships are hard. I had a buddy at the academy who was like that. Always competing with me, always making me feel bad about myself. But here's the thing. You're letting Alexis control your life even though she doesn't know she's doing it. You're hiding and sneaking around and that's not fair to you. Or to me, honestly. That hit me harder than I expected." He was right. I was still letting Alexis dictate what I could and couldn't do, just like I had been for 3 years. I just nodded and stared at my coffee. A week after the ball, Colin texted me saying his sister was visiting campus for the day. Her name was Margot, and she was 2 years older than him, worked as a teacher in the next state over. He really wanted me to meet her and suggested lunch at the student union. I almost said no because the student union was right in the middle of campus where everyone ate, but something about the way he asked made me agree. I met them at noon. Margot had the same green eyes as Colin but darker hair, and she hugged me like we'd known each other forever. We got food from the cafeteria line and sat at a table by the windows. I kept looking around nervously, expecting to see Alexis or one of our mutual friends. "Colin says you two had a great time at the ball," Margot said, biting into her sandwich. "He wouldn't shut up about you for weeks before it." "Really?" I looked at Colin and he shrugged with this embarrassed smile. I told her about volunteering at the Veteran Center. He'd noticed me there months ago, apparently. Margot listened and asked questions about my major and my plans after graduation. She was easy to talk to, the kind of person who made you feel comfortable right away. Then she noticed me checking the entrance again. "You okay? You seem nervous." I explained the Alexis situation, the whole thing from the beginning to now. Margot's expression changed as I talked, going from interested to concerned to almost angry. "Let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "This girl made you dress down so you wouldn't compete with her. Then when a guy chose you anyway, she sabotaged you and has spent years making you feel like you're not good enough. And you're still protecting her feelings?" When she said it like that, it sounded insane. I know it's complicated. It's not complicated. Margot put down her fork. Real friends don't spend years making you feel less than. They don't manipulate you or tear you down. And honestly, sometimes the trash takes itself out. You just have to let it go. Colin nodded in agreement. I sat there feeling like they'd both just said something obvious that I'd been refusing to see. We finished lunch and I walked out with them, and that's when I ran into Dominic from my dorm building. He was with his girlfriend Sarah, both of them heading into the union as we were leaving. "Hey," Dominic grinned when he saw me. "You looked amazing at the ball the other night." I didn't know you and Colin were together. My stomach dropped. I could feel Colin and Margot both looking at me, waiting to see what I'd say. Sarah nodded enthusiastically and said something about how cute we looked dancing together. Thanks, I managed. Can you maybe not mention it to anyone, though? It's kind of private. Dominic looked confused. Why would it be private? Everyone thought you guys looked great together. Half the people there were talking about it. I just would appreciate it if you didn't bring it up. Please. He shrugged. Okay, sure. Whatever you want. But it's not a secret. Like, people were posting pictures and everything. They walked into the union and I stood there feeling sick. Colin touched my arm gently. It's going to come out eventually, he said. You know that, right? I knew. I just wasn't ready for it yet. 2 days later, I was sitting in my biology lecture trying to focus on cellular respiration when my phone started buzzing in my bag. I ignored it at first, but it kept going. Buzz after buzz after buzz. I pulled it out under my desk and saw 12 texts from Alexis. My hands started shaking as I opened them. The first one just said, "What the fuck?" The second one was a screenshot of an Instagram post from someone at the ball. It was a group photo and I was visible in the background in my navy dress, Colin's arm around my waist. We were both smiling. The photo was tagged with both our names. The next 10 messages got progressively angrier. She asked why I lied, called me a snake, said she couldn't believe I'd betrayed her like this. The last one just said we needed to talk immediately. I couldn't focus for the rest of class. The professor's voice became background noise while I stared at my phone, watching the messages keep coming. By the time class ended, there were 20 texts. I walked back to the apartment slowly, taking the long way, knowing what was waiting for me. Alexis was standing in the living room with her arms crossed when I opened the door. Her face was red and her eyes looked wild. Why did you lie to me? She didn't even say hello. You went to the ball. You went with Colin, and you let me think you stayed home feeling sorry for yourself. I tried to explain. I told her about finding out she'd texted him from my phone, about fixing things with him, about being scared of how she'd react. But she talked over me before I could get 3 sentences out. You deliberately humiliated me. You snuck around behind my back and made me look stupid to everyone who knew the real story. Do you know how many people must have seen you there and then watched me talk about how Colin didn't want you? You're the one who texted him from my phone. My voice got louder. You sabotaged me first, because you stole my moment. She was yelling now. You knew how much that ball meant to me. You knew I'd been planning for it for 3 years, and you just took it. I didn't take anything. Colin chose me. That's not something you can steal. The argument went on for 20 minutes. She kept saying I'd been plotting against her since the beginning, that I must have contacted Colin beforehand to arrange the whole thing. She called me a snake and a fake friend. She said I'd been pretending to be supportive while stabbing her in the back. I tried to stay calm, but finally I lost it. You sabotaged me first, I said again. You texted Colin from my phone and told him I didn't want to go. You deleted the messages so I wouldn't know. And you've been undermining my confidence for 3 years by calling me the supportive friend type and acting like I should be grateful you even hang out with me. Alexis went completely silent. For about 10 seconds, she just stared at me. Then her expression changed into something cold. You're delusional if you think Colin actually likes you. He probably felt sorry for the sad girl in plain clothes. Or maybe it was a dare. Pick the ugliest girl you can find. That's probably what happened. Something inside me broke, but not the way it usually did when she said things like that. This time, instead of hurt, I felt clarity. I could see the pattern so clearly. Years of little comments designed to keep me small. Years of positioning herself as the pretty one, the chosen one, while I was supposed to accept being the backup friend. I'm done, I said. I'm done listening to you tear me down. I'm done pretending this is a normal friendship. You don't treat people you care about like this. She laughed. You'll come crawling back. You always do. Because without me, you're nobody. I walked to my room and closed the door. I could hear her moving around in the living room, slamming things. Then my phone started buzzing again. I looked at it and saw she was posting on social media. I opened Instagram and there it was. A long, detailed thread about how I'd betrayed her by secretly going to the ball after she'd been so gracious about Colin choosing me. She made it sound like she'd been totally supportive and I'd snuck around behind her back for no reason. She carefully edited out the part where she sabotaged me, made herself look like the victim of my cruel deception. My phone exploded with messages. Mutual friends asking what happened. People taking sides. Some believed her version. Some asked for mine. I sat on my bed watching the notifications pile up and realized she was forcing my hand. I could either publicly defend myself or let everyone believe I was the villain in her carefully crafted story. I sat on my bed staring at my phone until 3 in the morning. The notifications kept coming in waves, and every time I thought they'd stopped, another round would start. I opened a blank post and started typing. My hands shook as I tried to find the right words to explain everything without sounding cruel or defensive. I deleted entire paragraphs and rewrote them. I wanted people to understand what really happened, but I didn't want to destroy Alexis publicly, even though she'd tried to destroy me. Around 4 a.m., I finally had something that felt honest. I explained how she'd texted Colin from my phone while I was in the shower and deleted the conversation. I attached screenshots showing the message she'd sent pretending to be me and the timestamp proving I was showering when it was sent. I wrote about how she'd spent 3 years telling me I was the supportive friend type and not the chosen type. I kept it factual and tried not to make it sound like I was attacking her. I read it 12 times before finally hitting post at 5 in the morning. Then I turned off my phone and tried to sleep, but my brain wouldn't shut down. When I woke up 3 hours later, my phone had exploded with responses. Some people were shocked about the text message sabotage and said they couldn't believe Alexis would do something like that. Others commented that I still shouldn't have lied about going to the ball, and that deceiving her made me just as bad. A few mutual friends said we were both being dramatic over a guy and needed to grow up. One girl I barely knew wrote a long comment about how this whole situation was toxic, and we both needed therapy. I felt sick reading through everything because no matter what I said, some people were going to think I was the villain. My phone rang around 2 that afternoon and Colin's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer because I was embarrassed about the whole mess being so public. He asked if I was okay, and his voice sounded angry but not at me. He said he'd seen everything on social media and couldn't believe Alexis had sabotaged me like that. He asked why I hadn't told him about all the other stuff she'd said over the years about me being the supportive friend type. I explained that I'd gotten so used to her comments that I didn't even recognize them as put-downs anymore. Colin got quiet for a moment and then told me about his former best friend from high school who constantly competed with him over everything. Grades, sports, girls, even stupid stuff like who could do more push-ups. He said it took him 2 years after graduating to realize that real friends don't make you feel like you're always losing some invisible competition. We talked for over an hour about toxic friendships and why people stay in them. He said something that stuck with me, that sometimes we accept treatment from friends that we'd never accept from a stranger, because we confuse history with loyalty. I felt less alone after that call because someone finally understood why this whole situation was so complicated. That evening, someone knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it expecting Alexis, but found Liliana Gonzalez standing there instead. She lived in the room next to mine, and we'd always been friendly, but never really close. She asked if she could come in, and I moved aside to let her. She sat on my desk chair and said she was glad I finally stood up to Alexis. I must have looked surprised because she laughed and said she'd been watching the dynamic between us for 3 years. She told me Alexis treated me badly, and she'd wanted to say something before, but didn't want to cause drama. She said she'd seen how Alexis always positioned herself as the pretty one, and made subtle comments that kept my confidence low. She offered to be a witness if I needed to talk to housing about the hostel living situation. I thanked her and felt grateful because I usually kept to myself and didn't realize anyone had noticed what was happening. She hugged me before leaving and said real friends build you up instead of tearing you down. The next week was exhausting. Our mutual friend group basically split into factions. Some people sided completely with Alexis and stopped talking to me in the dining hall. Others thought her text message sabotage was worse than my deception and made a point to sit with me instead of her. Most people just seemed tired of the whole situation and avoided both of us. I lost a few friends I'd had since freshman year who believed Alexis's version that I'd been plotting against her from the beginning. But I also got closer to people like Liliana and Dominic who told me they'd always thought something was off about how Alexis treated me. Dominic pulled me aside one day and said he'd watched Alexis manipulate situations for years and was relieved I finally saw through it. The social fallout felt like middle school drama, but it was real, and it hurt losing people I'd considered friends. Living in the same apartment with Alexis became unbearable. We barely spoke except when absolutely necessary. She'd make pointed comments about fake friends whenever I walked through the living room. She'd turn up the TV volume when I was trying to study. She'd leave her dishes in the sink for days, knowing it bothered me. I started spending most of my time at the library or at Colin's place just to avoid being home. I went to the housing coordinator's office and explained the situation. The coordinator was sympathetic and said I could request a room change for spring semester, but nothing was available until then. She told me I was stuck in this hostile environment for another 6 weeks. I counted down the days on my calendar and tried to stay out of the apartment as much as possible. Colin invited me to a Marine Academy event 3 weeks after everything blew up. I was nervous about meeting more of his friends because I worried they'd heard about the drama. But when we arrived, everyone was welcoming and treated me like I belonged there. Colin introduced me to Declan Knight, one of his closest friends from the academy. Declan's date was friendly and mentioned that Colin had talked about me for weeks before the ball selection. She said he'd been planning how to ask me and was worried I might say no. I looked at Colin and he smiled and squeezed my hand. Being around people who didn't know about the Alexis situation and just saw me as Colin's girlfriend felt incredibly refreshing. No one was judging me or taking sides. They just accepted me as part of the group. Declan's date also said Colin had told everyone I volunteered at the Veterans Center, and that's what first caught his attention. Hearing that made Alexis's claims that he felt sorry for me seem even more ridiculous. I was making coffee in the apartment kitchen one morning when Alexis walked in. We'd been avoiding each other for 3 weeks, and the sudden proximity made me tense. She stood there for a moment and then said we needed to talk like adults. I cautiously agreed and turned to face her. She said she'd been thinking about everything and she was sorry for texting Colin from my phone. My hope lifted for a second until she immediately added that I still shouldn't have lied about going to the ball. She said we both made mistakes, but mine was worse because I deliberately deceived her. I realized this was as close to an apology as she was capable of giving, one that still made everything partially my fault. She couldn't just apologize without adding conditions or spreading the blame around. I took a deep breath and told her I appreciated the partial apology, but I couldn't go back to a friendship where she needed me to be less confident, so she could feel better about herself. I said her years of subtle insults about me being the supportive friend type had really damaged me even if she didn't mean them that way. She looked genuinely surprised, like she had no idea what I was talking about. She said she was just being honest about our different social roles, and that some people are naturally more outgoing and attractive, while others are better in supporting roles. She said I was being oversensitive and reading too much into normal friend observations. That confirmed everything I needed to know. She fundamentally didn't understand how her words had affected me and probably never would. We reached an agreement to be civil roommates for the remaining weeks of the semester. No more pointed comments about fake friends. No more social media drama or public arguments. Just polite coexistence until housing changes happened in January. It wasn't friendship and it wasn't the closure some people expected, but it was livable. I felt relieved to have clear boundaries even if they weren't the reconciliation everyone thought we should have. Some mutual friends seemed disappointed that we didn't hug and make up. But I was done pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Finals week came and went. I got my approval for a room change to a single for spring semester. I packed up my stuff the day after my last exam and moved everything to my parents' house for winter break. My sister picked me up and on the drive home she asked how I was doing. I told her everything that happened since the ball. She was quiet for a while and then said she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She said watching me accept Alexis's treatment for 3 years had been hard, but she knew I had to figure it out on my own. My parents were supportive when I got home, even though they'd always liked Alexis and seemed sad the friendship ended. My mom said sometimes friendships run their course and that's okay. My dad asked if I was sure I'd tried everything to fix it. I explained that you can't fix a friendship where one person needs the other to stay small. They both hugged me and said they understood. Having their support felt validating even though the situation was complicated and messy. Winter break arrived with the quiet relief of distance and space. Colin and I started doing video calls every few days, and those conversations felt different from any friendship I'd had before. He'd ask about my day and actually listen to my answers without redirecting the conversation back to himself. When I mentioned feeling nervous about a family dinner, he didn't tell me I was overreacting or that other people had it worse. He just said my feelings made sense and asked what would help me feel better. I noticed how different this was from years of Alexis dismissing my concerns or turning them into opportunities to talk about her own problems. One night we were on a call and I mentioned missing the campus veteran center where we'd first crossed paths, and Colin smiled and said he'd been hoping I'd bring that up. He told me he'd visited 3 times before the ball selection, always timing it so he could see me interact with the older vets, and he'd been working up the courage to introduce himself for weeks. Hearing that made something shift in my chest because Alexis had spent years convincing me that guys like Colin didn't notice girls like me unless they felt sorry for us. But Colin had noticed me specifically because of my character and kindness, not despite some imagined flaw. We made plans for spring semester, including study dates at the library and weekend trips to nearby hiking trails, and I realized I was building something real with someone who genuinely wanted me to succeed and feel confident. My sister came into my room one afternoon and caught me smiling at my phone during a text conversation with Colin, and she sat on my bed and said she was glad I'd finally found someone who treated me the way I deserved. That validation from her meant everything because she'd watched the Alexis friendship damage my self-worth for 3 years. Spring semester started with me moving into my single room in a different building, and the freedom of that space felt incredible. I could decorate however I wanted without worrying about Alexis's opinions. I could study without her pointed comments about how some people had to work harder than others. I could just exist without constantly monitoring whether I was being too confident or too successful or too anything. 3 weeks into the semester, I was grabbing lunch in the dining hall when I saw Alexis at a table across the room with some girls from her communications class. Our eyes met for a brief second, and we both nodded politely before looking away. No dramatic confrontation. No tears or apologies or attempts to rehash everything that happened. Just 2 people who used to share everything and now shared nothing. I sat with Liliana and Declan, who'd become real friends over the past few months, people who celebrated my successes instead of finding ways to diminish them. Colin joined us a few minutes later and kissed my cheek before sitting down, and I caught Alexis watching from across the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. I turned back to my friends and focused on the conversation happening at my table, instead of worrying about what she thought. Sometimes I felt sad about losing what I thought Alexis and I had, but mostly I felt relieved to be free of constantly feeling like I wasn't enough.